Okay. Good morning, Shavua Tov. It's very difficult to change your mind. As a matter of fact, when I try to Google change your mind, then the first results that you get is for psychedelic drugs. Look yourself. You know, maybe it's personalized to me for some reason. But yeah, that's yeah. How to change your mind? You just Google that, and that would be the result that you get. So that I think is a good sign to the difficulty of changing one's mind. It's even more difficult, I think, when we speak about a leader. And even more than that, when we speak about a spiritual leader, because if I argue that I have some connection with the divine wisdom, with the divine truth, then how can it be that I would be wrong? And as the subject that we speak about is more cardinal, is more crucial, is more critical, then obviously it would be how much more difficult to admit that I was wrong. There are some religions in which they just couldn't swallow this pill. So they got to the conclusion of infallibility. That is that whoever it would be, the chief religious authority just cannot be wrong per definition. Is that also the matter by the Torah, by Yahadut? So we have an interesting memra, I'd say a saying. So we know that there is a tefillah called Modim de Rabbanan. So we have the Modim in the Shmona Esrei, and there is the Modim that we say when the Shliach Tzibur says his own Modim in the Chazarat Hashatz, then we say another version of Modim. Now, as a paraphrase on this wording, Modim de Rabbanan, so the Modim there means to give thanks, but in Hebrew, the same word is used for giving thanks and for admitting a failure or a mistake. Hoda'ah means either thanking or admitting a mistake. So Modim de Rabbanan means when Rabbanan, meaning when Chachamim, admits their mistake. And the saying goes that Modim de Rabbanan hayno shivchayu, meaning a Talmid Chacham is being praised according to the amount of times that he is admitted to his own mistakes. But obviously, it's much easier saying than doing, because when you want to preserve your authority, then usually you perceive that any admission of mistake would cause, and probably it would, cause the public to doubt your future decisions and announcements. Because if you're mistaken once, what would stop you from being mistaken twice and 3 times? So it is very difficult in the end to find and to have the courage to admit a mistake. As I said, that is correct to any one of us, and it's even more difficult to people in higher positions, and especially in higher spiritual positions. And this shiur, I would like to see with you, to study with you 3 study cases of great rabbis of the last generation who held one position before the events of the last century, which were momentous, which were, can we say, great events, some of them horrifying. And these events called into question very deeply held beliefs and positions that they had. Now, again, usually, any one of us, it's just a human nature that when an event happens, we usually find it as a proof to whatever we believed earlier. So even in such a case as what we had this year, which was, I think, pretty surprising for all of us. So you could have believed that when something so surprised had happened as the attack on Hamas, on Israel, in Simchat Torah, in last Simchat Torah, you would maybe expect to find people changing their positions because it was something unexpected. However, I would not right now have a poll here, but I would believe, based on speaking with other, based also on my own personal experience, but based also on speaking with many people during the Miluim, during the war, that most of us saw whatever happened as a proof to what we believed earlier. If anything, it changed our position, then we say we were not vocal enough in our position earlier. So if we believed, whatever it would be, so if we believed that there should not be any judicial reform, then now that's the proof that any movement towards that would cause a social rift and the weakness of Medinat Israel and everything that would happen as a cause. Other side would believe, here is the proof that if the court would put brakes on the ability of the army and the government to rule, then that would cause the breakdown of our defense towards the enemy. And if you believed before that you need a unity among the people, then now you have a beautiful proof, of course, that we need a unity. Otherwise, see what happens. But if you believed before that you need to separate, then now you see where these fanatics have brought us. Obviously, we now have to separate. Otherwise, we would suffer like that once and again. So you see that everyone can use what happened, utilize it as a proof to what he believed earlier. And basically, that is also what happened with the Holocaust or the establishment of Medinat Israel. People tend to see what happens as a proof to their previously held beliefs. And as I said, that is right for regular people, and it's even more so for rabbis. Because again, would you say, no, I was completely mistaken in anything that not only that I held, but that I taught and preached and made decisions, and maybe people paid by their lives because of my decisions? That's very difficult for anyone to do such a U-turn. So we would like to study today 3 cases of rabbis, great rabbis, leaders, that were able to reevaluate their positions. And of course, we cannot learn that each one of them deserves a shiur by himself. We cannot go deeply into the biography of any one of them. And Bezrat Hashem, I hope that at least about one of them, maybe 2 of them, we would have a separate shiur. However, right now, I would like to go and only sketch the biography of each one of them and the turn that he was able to make. And of course, all of that should inspire us, Bezrat Hashem, to be able also to reconsider our own positions and beliefs in light of, can be global events or personal events. And I think it is clear that the ability to reevaluate yourself is the first step towards Teshuva. Because if you cannot reconsider yourself, then how can you correct? We would begin, the first Rebbe we'd speak about, Bezrat Hashem, is Rav Yisshachar Shlomo Teichtel. Rav Yisshachar Shlomo Teichtel was born in 1885 in Hungary. And he, after being given smicha, ordained as a Rav, then he was a Rav in a city which nowadays is Slovakia. It's called Fishtan or Fishtian. Here they write it Fishtian on his book. It's in the west of Slovakia. And he became very famous. He published a responsa named Mishne Sachir, which was considered very high level and made him one of the leading poskim of the generation. He was very close to Rabbi Chaim Eliezer Shapira, who was the Minchat El-Azhar, maybe better known as the Munkach Rebbe. Now, the Munkachers were the most extreme anti-Zionists in Europe. And when the people of the Minchat El-Azhar, of Rabbi Chaim Eliezer Shapira, issued a kuntres with letters from all the rabbis that they were able to collect from, to gather from, letters against Zionism, then he also contributed to this contrast. And that this is from as late as 1936. So 1936, the Nazis already in control of Germany. It's not only clouds in some distant horizon. Things look very bleak. Obviously, no one could imagine what is going to happen in 1939. But it is not difficult to see what is happening, at least in Germany. And that's what he writes in 1936. So it was published, maybe the letter is a year before, but that is what is published in his name in 1936. So this is from this Kobetz Tikkun Olam. This contrast, this pamphlet, notebook, with letters from different Rabbanim against Zionism. And he says, רבינו הבית חדש כתב, דקדושת הארץ דלמטה נשפע מקדושת הארץ דלמעלה. So the land, Eretz Israel, its holiness coming from the holiness from above. וקדושה זו נכנסת בפירותיה. And the holiness from above goes into the fruits of Eretz Israel. ובאכילת פירותיה אנו ניזונים מקדושת השכינה ומטהרתה. So it's beautiful. So when you eat פירות from Eretz Israel, you are being fed, you are being, you're giving nutrition from the holiness of the fruits of Eretz Israel. ובהיפך מזה חס ושלום. But חס וחלילה, God forbid, when it's the reverse, אם תטמא הארץ, when the land becomes defiled, נמשכת הטומאה גם בפירותיה. Then this impurity also goes into its fruits. ובאוכלם פירות היונקים מטומאת הארץ, נכנסת הטומאה רחמנא ליצלן בתוך בני ישראל. So if people that lived in Eretz Israel defile it by their sin, so if people come, and as you, I think, well aware, the majority of the Zionist movement in 1936, it's very obvious already, that the majority of the movement and its leaders are non-observant. Non-observant may be somewhat of a misnomer. Many of them are anti-religious. And they go into the land and they do not observe Allah, they do not observe Torah. So he says they defile the land. So instead of having holiness, the Holy Land, it's now the land of impureness, of tum'ah. So when they eat from the fruits of the land, נכנסת הטומאה רחמנא ליצלן בתוך בני ישראל, they become even more defiled. והקדושה יוצאת מהם ונסתלקה השכינה מקרב ישראל. So they cause, these people, the Zionists, coming to the land of Israel and not doing mitzvah there, they cause not the bringing of Shechina into the land, but the removal of Shechina, of the divine presence from Eretz Israel. וכעת שבניין ארץ ישראל עומדות על הפרק. So now they speak about building, settling the land. ראוי לכל בר ישראל ללמוד זאת. Every Jew should know that. כדי לרכוש איזו השגה, מהו ארץ ישראל האמיתי. They should understand what is the real. The real Eretz Israel is not only geography. It's the spiritual life of Eretz Israel, he says. וסימנך ארץ אוכלת יושביה. That's amazing. So who is the Rebbe? Who is he quoting here? The Meraglim, the spies. Say the spies said that the land is Eretz Ochelet Yoshvea. It is devouring its inhabitants. Why? If the inhabitants are only interested in the physical fruits of the land and not in the spiritual dimension of Eretz Israel, then yes, that is what it is. It is a land that devours its inhabitants because, as I said, the purity is being removed and impurity comes in instead. And he says that's also why they call it Palestine, and not Israel. He says the Zionist movement, when you read their pamphlets, they do not speak about Eretz Israel, they speak about Palestine. Why? Because it was the mandat, so that's how people spoke. And he says that is because they are not interested in the holiness of Bnei Israel. The calling it in a different name, that's by itself is a proof that they do not come in for the holy purpose of Eretz Israel. ובאמת, I'm in the second paragraph. ובאמת, so he says in truth, כל מעשה ופעולה אנושית לא יועיל מאומה להרמת קרן ציון וירושלים. So any human act or deed would not contribute an inch for the raising of ארץ ישראל and ירושלים עד שישקיף השם מן השמיים, until הקדוש ברוך הוא would look down on us from heavens ויערה עלינו בכלל רוח טהרה מן השמיים. So God would pour on us a spirit of pureness, להאיר עלינו אור חדש מששת ימי בראשית, and a new light would shine from the days of creation, ועד אותו העת שיחדש השם האור הגנוז, until we would see this new line shining on Zion, אור חדש על ציון תאיר, till we see that. אין לנו התעסקות אחרת, רק לעסוק בתורה, בקיבוץ וריבוץ בתלמידים, בחיידרים ובישיבות, על הדרך המקובל בידינו מאבותינו. So he says, until this new light would come from heaven, we should do nothing but teaching Torah in chadarim and in yeshivot, in the old way that we received from our forefathers. 1936. So someone coming to him asking, should I make aliyah to Eretz Israel? He's not only saying that to people coming to him personally, he's publishing that in a letter. What is my practical instruction? Stay where you are and learn Torah. שרק בלימוד תורתנו הקדושה על דרך סתם הישן, he says, and do not try to have any practical benefit of it. It should be stam according to the old ways. He is a rabbi of the old ways. Hungary, people that know Hungary knows, these are the people of the old school, by definition. They are old schoolers more than the old school itself. That's the people that know them know. That's what I'm saying now. They would not be ashamed in what I'm saying now. That's their flag. So רק בלימוד תורתנו הקדושה על דרך סתם הישן והמקובל נזכה לגאולה. Redemption can only come through Torah learning. נקודה, as we say. That is 1936. As we all know, in 1939, then World War II breaks. And in 1941, the Nazis surprise attack Russia and begin to advance into Eastern Europe. And the advancement of the Nazis means, in the beginning, the first year, before they understand that they need a more industrious way to exterminate the Jews. So in the beginning, it's what is called sometimes the Holocaust by bullets. So they murder about 1.5 million. Of course, all the numbers are estimations, but about 1.5 million Jews in all of the killing pits and in their villages before beginning to establish the death camps, as I said, in a more industrious way, as the German way. And he begins to understand what is going on. He runs from Slovakia to Hungary because Hungary, for a major part of the war, was it was a vessel of Germany, but it was, in a way, it was independent, and many of its Jews were still alive as of 1944. I think it is well known that up. As the division is one example, but maybe some of you have their parents or grandparents in Hungary in 1944, and people that lived there did not believe, and that is really, for us, it's very difficult to understand, but it is just the clear reality. It's also my family. In 1944, they still didn't believe that there is a Holocaust going around them. All Europe, 4 million Jews were already killed. And they do not understand, do not see, and do not believe when people come in and try to warn them. Now, again, we are not in any place to judge anyone. My own Saba Rabba, the father of my grandmother, Zichronam Livracha. So he was, in 1944, we speak about around Pesach of 1944, and the Germans finally took complete control. They entered and they took complete control of Hungary. So they began to send the Jews to Auschwitz. Most of Hungarian Jews in the end finished in Auschwitz. But you couldn't come immediately to Auschwitz because that was Eichmann's plan. You had too many Jews and not enough trains. So they had to wait in temporary camps on their way to Auschwitz. So my grandmother's family, my grandmother was 18 at the time. Her family was waiting in one of these temporary camps. Now, they were told that they are being sent to work. And they believed it. So my great-grandfather had paid money. He bribed the Germans, the guards, in this temporary camp to be the first one to be sent. Because he believed that this temporary camp is a horrible place. It was a horrible place. So it would be better to finally reach the final destination in which they would be able to live. Okay, to work, obviously it would not be easy. So he bribed in order to be sent to his death. He was immediately sent to the gas chambers. In my great-grandmother, my grandmother survived. And I don't think it's a special story in any way. Yeah, okay, but it did happen. It did happen. So they didn't know, and they didn't believe when they were told. He is running from Slovakia to Hungary in order to save himself. So that is still 1933. But they don't know about mass extermination, but they understand that the situation in Europe is extremely bad. That they understand. They just believe that they would be able to survive it. And he begins to think, his yeshiva was closed down, there are no longer letters coming from all over Europe with questions, with she'elot, so now he has time to sit and think. And he's hiding because he's a rabbi, and many times the rabbis were persecuted more than ordinary Jews. Then he, most of the time, is hiding in some roof of a house. And he's just sitting there with paper and a pen, and he's writing. He doesn't even have sefarim. He's writing mostly from his memory, but he's beginning to reconsider. And he reaches the conclusion that he was wrong. And as a matter of fact, that his rabbi, the Munkacher Rebbe, was wrong. Now that's a conclusion that is extremely difficult to reach. Because many others who held the same position just came to the conclusion that because of the sins of the neologists or the Zionists or the Reform or whoever you do not like, so they are the cause to what is happening to us. So obviously what we have to do is to double down in our ideology. That's the natural response. And again, I'm not judging because that's just, all of us are a bit like that. The greatness is to do what he did. And that is, he reconsidered and he reevaluated. And in 1943, he is writing a book, a sefer. This is the sefer. It's called Em Habanim Semicha. The mother of the children would rejoice, which is part of the nevuah about Eretz Israel when its children would come back. Now, the book is amazing. Of course, we can not read. We did only very small segment. You already understand what direction he's going to take. So before even reading, I would say that he tried to get haskamot on the sefer before publishing it. In 1943, he couldn't get the rabbis that he was part of them to sign an haskama for the sefer. So what he did in the end, he had one rabbi giving him an haskama, and a part of that, he republished the haskamot that Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer received 60 years before for his sefer called Drishat Zion. So he said everyone that gave an haskama to Rav Kalischer would obviously also be happy with my sefer. So he reprinted the old haskamot for Rav Kalischer. And now what he wrote in his own introduction, so I'm in source bit. Ve'ata, 1943, יאמרו נא החרדים, ולא ידעתי אם יוכלו באיזה פעם לתרץ עצמם לפני בית דין של מעלה. Very harsh words. He say, I do not know if the Haredim, and here it means the Orthodox, would ever be able to excuse themselves from the heavenly court, על מניעתם מלקח חלק בתנועת בניין הארץ, for refusing to partake in the movement of building ארץ ישראל. ממילא אם גם היראים והחרדים היו בעצה ובמפעל הזה, היה לארצנו הקדושה מראה ותואר אחר לגמרי. He says, and that's, I think, very simple. It's so simple that sometimes you can cry. Why didn't it happen? There were millions of Orthodox Jews. Again, Orthodox is somewhat anachronistic, but Orthodox Jews in Eastern Europe, if they would have joined the Zionist movement in its inception, then obviously the whole Jewish state would have looked completely different. So on one hand, you refuse to take place and to take your share, and then you have complaints how the people that do take and do why they do not do as you would have wanted them. But it happens again just in our times. So it's very difficult to see it. It's very difficult to see it. He says, if they would have joined, היה לארצנו הקדושה מראה ותואר, everything would have looked completely different, במעלה של קדושה, ממה שיש לה עתה. אם כי, and then he says, but also you should know, גם הפנים והתואר של עתה, הוא רצוי ונחמד לפני אבינו שבשמיים. See what a stark difference from what he wrote earlier. Just a few, 8 years earlier. He says, you should know that even the face that the land has now, with the kibbutzim and everything that is going on, he says, this is also beautiful and desirable in the eyes of God. וכמו שיכתוב בפנים להלן, prove it, he says from חז"ל. אבל הכל מודים שאם היה הבניין בצירוף ובהשתתפות החרדים, היה זה במעלה קדושה ועדיפה. So obviously, if the Haredim would have joined, then the sanctity would be much, much higher. במעלה עליונה, בקדושה עליונה הרבה מאוד. ועתה שהם התייצבו מרחוק, but now that they stand aloof, stand from afar, אין להם להתפלא ולשאול שאלות על זה ועל זה. Now, you can ask questions. Why they do not keep Shabbat? Why they do not keep Shemitah? Well, the people that do not observe Shabbat and do not keep Shemitah, these are the people that made Aliyah, so that's what we have. כי הם החייבים בדבר. Extremely sharp.
Does he acknowledge?
Yes, you would come to that. ועוד, אילו היה הבניין של הארץ עוד מלפנים בהשתתפות ובהסכמת כלל ישראל. He says, if the building of the land would be in the agreement and the join of all of עם ישראל, כבר הייתה הארץ מבונה ומשוכללת להתקבץ בתוכה חלק גדול מיושבי הגלות, וחלק גדול מאחינו בני ישראל שנהרגו בימינו, בעוונותינו הרבים, היו ניצולים על ידי שהיו כבר בארץ ישראל. He says, if in the beginning of the 20th century, or the end of the 19th century, you would have hundreds of thousands of Jews from Eastern Europe coming to Eretz Israel, they would have been saved. They would have been saved. There's no way around it. ועתה מי מקבל האחריות בשביל אותו דם כשר שנשפך בימינו בעוונות? Who will take responsibility for the blood that was spilled? וחמדו מלי, and I think he says, שכל אלו המנהיגים, all of these leaders, שהיו מונעים את ישראל מלילך ולהשתתף עם הבונים, לא יוכלו לכפר את ידיהם ולומר ידינו לא שפכו את הדם הזה. They would never be able to wash their hands from this blood. Very, very stark. And then he acknowledges, and he says, ואודה על האמת, I need also to admit the truth. ואזכיר את חטאי, I would also mention my own sins. שגם בעיניי היה לנמאס מפעל הזה של בניין הארץ. I also was seeing the movement of building the land as something that is gross, something that you need to distance yourself from. Why? מחמת ששמעתי כן מהרבה מנהיגי חרדים סתם, ונשרש בליבי כך, ולא התעניינתי בזה כלל. So he has an excuse, very interesting excuse. He says, you know, truth is, I never looked into the matter. And he says, I heard it from different leaders, and that's what took root in my heart. ולא התעניינתי, in truth is, it was not something I was interested in. כי טרוד הייתי בגרסה, בלימוד תלמידים, לחבר חיבורים בגפת ובשו"ת, להשיב לכל שואל בדבר השם. So he says, truth is, I was very engaged and busy in Torah teaching, in Torah learning. Well, that's what he wrote in his letter. That's what you should do, right? You should disengage yourself from any practical dealing and only nar Torah, only deal with Torah, only engage in Torah. And now he says, well, because I was too much engaged in Torah, I was not open to see what is going on. And I made a mistake. He says it, he admits openly, he says it was a sin of mine. And he is very, I think, he's very honest about the excuse. I don't think that he thought that his excuse sounds good. It's just the truth. And again, I am not in a place to judge anyone, especially not he was a real gadol b'Israel, and someone that was honest enough to understand that he made a mistake and to publicly acknowledge it and to publish a sefer about it, not only give a drasha in shul, publish a sefer in which he is announcing his own mistake. Not something that is easy to do. However, that's something I think that we ourselves can, again, take to ourselves and ask ourselves, when are we so engaged? We are in a loop, right? That we have a position, and this position enforces us not to look aside. רק אחר שלקינו בגלות החל הזה, so he says, only after we are injured so strongly in this galut, in this exile, meaning in this war, עיינתי בהלכה זו, והאיר השם עיניי שטעות היה בידי. Only now Hashem had lit in my eyes. I began to learn this halacha, I mean this question of aliyah in a more deep way, and I understood there was mistake. וביד אשר התנגדו לזה, and I understood that I was mistaken, and all those that oppose it were mistaken. ואני מודה ואומר, כמו שמצינו בה, it says, I openly admit my mistake. As we found in the Shas, he says, שהודו ואמרו דברים שאמרתי לכם, טעות היו בידי. The things that I said to you were a mistake. I had a mistake at my hand. ומודים דרבנן, היינו שבחיו. And as we mentioned in the beginning of the shiur, the admitting of a mistake, that's a praise. וברוך השם, אני אין נוחת משום אדם לומר בפומבי דברים אמת שבלבי. He says, I am not afraid of anyone to say what I think is right. When I thought what was right back then, I said what I thought was correct. And now that I changed my mind, I'm saying what I think is true. ואין אני מבטל דעתי דעת תורה, משום גדול או רבי בזמננו. It doesn't matter what would be the level of the Rav to disagree. I would only change my mind אם יתווכח עמי בדרך משא ומתן של תורה בראיות מדברי חז"ל. So the only way that I'm going to change my mind, if I would be proven wrong, I'm open to be proven wrong. I was wrong once, I may be wrong now. But as long as I have a position, I will say it out aloud. He was not allowed even to give drashot in the shuls in Hungary. Excuse me, in Budapest.
Well, because
of what he wrote. And he was able to publish in some underground publishing house. Now, in 1944, when the deportation from Hungary began to Jews, he tried to run back to Slovakia. He hoped that there they finished, so he would be able to hop from one place to the other. Unfortunately, he was caught in September of 1944, and he was sent in a train. In the train, it was a train which was shared by Jews and Ukrainian war captives. Prisoners, yes. And the Ukrainians, they were also captured by the Nazis, but against the Jews, they were more or less, they had the same ideology. So they were abusing, and abusing again, that's a very, very easy word. They were abusing, understatement, they were abusing the Jews that were with them in the train. And as the Nazis gave very little food, then they would take the food of the Jews. Rav Teichtel saw that they took from some old person his bread, and he couldn't stand and just see it from the side. So he approached the Ukrainian soldier and told him that he needs to give back the bread that he stole from the Jew. As you can guess, what happened next was that the Ukrainian soldier began to hit the tweet of Teichtel, and he killed him, he murdered him. And that was his end. Yeah, if you want, it's in source Gimel here. They published, he also wrote a diary, Rav Teichtel, during the Holocaust, and it was published in 1995. As the title is Emunat Tzrufa Bekur HaShoah. And there is an introduction by his son. And the son says that that's a testimony that he had, that's how his father was killed. I'll just read just a few lines.
His son survived.
His son survived. However, it's very interesting. The son, he left his father before the change of heart. So the son is somewhat, it's very interesting, and I think it's beyond the scope of our shiur, but the son for many years tried to prevent the reprinting of the Sefer. And when he finally gave permission to print the book, then he conditioned it in he writing an introduction in which he writes that people misinterpreted what his father wrote, and he was never in favor of Zionism. It's very interesting to see how he's trying to excuse his father in order, but you have to understand also the son, it's for ideology reasons, but also the son is trying to purify the name of his father in the circles that he lived in. So he's apologizing his father away. It's unfortunate, but it's part of life, I guess. Yeah, so that's we would skip. If someone wants, you can read here from in source Gimel is the story of how he was murdered. So that's the first story that I wanted to read with you, the story of Rav Teichtel. The next story is the story of Rav Menachem Mendel Kasher. Rav Menachem Mendel Kasher was born in 1895 in Poland, in Warsaw. And he was born to a family from the Gerer Hasidut. And he was a genius of geniuses. He had a memory, unbelievable memory, and an ability to contain, he was like a walking encyclopedia. And he liked to gather more and more sources about everything under the sun. This was the type of a person. And already in a very young age, he was writing letters to great rabbis and giving letters back. Rav Wasserman, the Chazon Ish, at the age of 19, he became the editor of the Degel HaTorah. That was the newspaper, the publication of the Agudat Israel. At the age of 20... that is in 1920. So 1920 was 25. In the age of 25, he penned, again, a pamphlet that was, so it's 1920. So we should now need to roll ourselves back. And in Eretz Israel, it's only a few years after the British were given the mandate. And the British wants to establish the beginning of the Jewish institutions, democratic institutions. So they established what was called the Knesset Israel, which later became the Knesset. And they wanted all the Jews that were citizens of the British mandate in Palestine to be able to vote to Knesset Israel. And the question that was raised was, should women also be given the right to vote? Now, the Aguda was against. The the Chilonim, we may say, were in favor. The Mizrahis always were in the middle, meaning they said that and the other. Rav Kook himself, by the way, was the chief rabbi, was against. It's a story to itself. But in the Mizrahi, there were Rabbanim to here and to there. And Rav Mendel Menachem Kasher, that as I said, was the spokesperson almost for Aguda, not in Eretz Israel, in Poland. So he's penning a whole pamphlet in the question, which is called Da'at HaRabbanim u'Milchemet Mitzvah. So you can already understand where it is going to go. Da'at HaRabbanim, so the opinion of the rabbis, and Milchemet Mitzvah, and a commandment war. So it's a holy war. And now he could have just limited himself to waging war about the question of women's right to vote or to be voted. However, he does not limit himself only to this question. So in source Dalet, this is what he writes in 1920. המזרחי נטעה גם כן אחר העגל החדש שנברא ונתגדל במחנה הציונים, הוא הלאומיות החדשה. So he says, the Mizrahi have gone astray. They are following the new egel, the new golden calf. Who created this calf? The Tzionim. And what is this calf? הלאומיות. Nation, nationalism. שאין לה שום שייכות כלל עם לאום בני ישראל העתיק, עם עם קדוש אתה להשם. It has nothing to do, since new nationalism has nothing to do with the old Jewish race or ethnic group or religion. That's what he wants to say. Because the old religion, the old Jewish race, what is this based upon? עם קדוש אתה להשם אלוקיך, that you are a holy nation to God. It's not nationalism like the French are a nation. A French is a French by the merit of being born a French, and that's it. Or an Englishman. But in order to be a Jew, you need to practice Judaism. You need to practice Torah. At least in order to be a Jew in a good standing. רק לאומיות חדשה ממש, ששנים ספורות לה, so all this new national idea that a Jew is a Jew just because he was born a Jew. That's something new, he says, only a few years. ועגל זה רחמנא ליצלן, החטיא אלפי אלפים מבני ישראל. So this new calf, everyone is dancing around. And he says, thousands and thousands of Jews are going astray. והזניח ליבם מאביהם שבשמיים. כי בעוד שזה זמן לא כביר, עד שלא פרסו הציונים כל כך את רשתם על פני פוילין, היו מקומות לאין מספר, שלא נראה ולא נשמע מי שיעבור על מצוות התורה. He says, before the Zionists came in Poland, it was very difficult to see someone that is not keeping the mitzvot of the Torah, at least in public. Now, I am not going to argue about the factual correctness of this statement. It's almost certainly not correct. But we leave that aside. Before the Zionists were the Bondists, there were others. But we leave that aside. Because his argument is an argument. He says, as long as people saw that in order to be a Yehudi, again, in good standing, you need to observe Torah mitzvah, then at least in public, they didn't want to be seen as non-observant, because that would mean that they would be rejected from the Jewish body. However, after this idea of nationality took place, then now people say, I can be completely non-observant, and I would still be a good Jew. Yehudi Tov. And this says that's an invention of the Zionist movement. יכולים רחמנא ליצלן על כל התורה לעבור ולמלות כל תאוום ליבם וחפצם בפרהסיה, ובכל זאת להיות יהודי נלהב, אם רק יקרא את עצמו לאומי וידבר בלשון הקודש ויעבוד עבור יישוב ארץ ישראל. So new mitzvot came in. The new mitzvot are to call yourself לאומי, national, and to speak Hebrew, and to work for the settlement of the land. And if you're doing these three, you are a Jew in a good standing, regardless of Shabbat, regardless of kashrut, regardless of טהרת המשפחה, regardless of anything. ואולם אנו החרדים לא כן סוברים. It says, we the חרדים, we do not hold like that. אלא כל מי שכופר ועובר על אחד מעיקרי התורה בפרהסיה, if you are uprooting one of the principles of the Torah in public, אינו נחשב בכלל. Then you are not part of the Jewish people. Now again, he knows that it's not that you become a goy, but not observing the Torah. What he means is, we do not count you. You are not part of the nation for what it matters. ואפילו בעבודת יישוב ארץ ישראל, אסור לסייע על פי דין התורה את הציונים העוברים בפרהסיה על הדת. As long as the Zionists are publicly violating the commandments of the Torah, you are not allowed to assist them in settling the land. Because you are not allowed to, they are not part, again, as individuals, you should be mekarev them, of course. But they could not be seen as representatives of the Jewish public, of the Jewish nation, of the Jewish body. So you cannot see them going to the land as the return of the Jewish body to Eretz Israel. Very clear, I think. 30 years passed by. And in 1950, in 1924, maybe I should. How did he pass the war? In 1924, the Ger Rebbe is sending him to Eretz Israel to establish Yeshivat Sfat Emet. Maybe some of you visited in Tel Aviv, excuse me, in Yerushalayim. In Yerushalayim. There is one in Tel Aviv, there is one in Yerushalayim. He established the one in Yerushalayim.
That was my baby's always sent money there.
They only sent money. Okay, so he sent money to Rav Kasher. So Rav Kasher was the one to establish the Sfat Emet, Yeshivat Sfat Emet. He also began what he would be known for, and that is his monumental work called the Torah Shlema. The Torah Shlema is an encyclopedia of Pirushim on the Torah, meaning he said, I am going to collect all the Pirushim that were ever written on every pasuk. So yeah, that's a project before computers. I don't know. It's all is always very tricky. But he wrote. He was able throughout his life. He was able to write on 4 chumashim out of the 5, and that's something that you can use up to this day. It's called Torah Shlema, and some of it was even translated to English. You can find it. They called it the Encyclopedia of Biblical Interpretation or something like that. If you want, I can try to find. I think most of it is now for free, indeed, because it's expired. It's copyright. Anyhow, so he became known for that. As I said, he was this type of a person. He knew everything about everything. He was a few years in New York, gathering money for the yeshiva and also for his projects, because printing was very expensive. He was always printing, not only this series, he was always printing everything under the sun. So he was also in New York for a few years, so he was not in Europe for World War II, which is a good deal, I think, for everyone that was able to escape. And in 1950, 2 years after the establishment of Medinat Israel, he publishes a very small booklet called Kos HaChamishi, the Fifth Cup. It was later adjoined as an appendix to what he issued, again, another printing of his, which is called Haggadah Shlema, which is an Haggadah that he tried to collect all the different variants of the Haggadah that he knew about, and many new Perushim that were not available up till his printing. So it's about drinking a 5th cup on Pesach. I guess that no one sitting here is drinking the 5th cup. You keep it for Eliyahu Hanavi, right? Now, let's see what he writes. Yes. So maybe you're going to identify what he is going to write here. Excuse me? I'm not aware. Okay, I did. Thank you. So Rav Menachem Kasher writes, 30 years after he writes about the golden calf called nationality, he writes, והנה בזמננו אנו, שזכינו לראות חסדי השם יתברך וישועתו עלינו בהקמת מדינת ישראל. So he merits to see the חסדי השם, the kindness of God, and his salvation in the establishment of the Jewish state, of מדינת ישראל, שהיא התחלתא דגאולה, that is the beginning of redemption, וישועה מגלות אדום, this is the salvation or the beginning of salvation, from the exile, the fourth exile, וקיום הבטחת והבאתי אתכם אל הארץ, we are seeing the fulfillment of the promise, I would bring you to the land. טוב ויפה לקיים מצווה מן המובחר בשתיית כוס חמישי, שהוא נגד והבאתי. So it is correct and proper to drink, not give it to Eliyahu הנביא. You are the Eliyahu הנביא. Drink the fifth cup, he says, 1950. Drink the fifth cup, and say the Hallel הגדול, כי עמדו לנו חסדי השם בעת מצור ומצוק, בקום עלינו יחדיו 7 אומות להרע ולהשמיד את המדינה העברית. So 7 nations came against us, and God sent us redemption and salvation. והשם ברחמיו הרבים הפר עצת זידים ועשה לנו נס ופלא עזרה וגבורה. So God in his mercifulness had destroyed the wisdom of the evil ones and made miracles for us, Ezra and help us, and גבורה and might, and we are hoping and praying to God, כי קווי איילת השחר, these rays of light that began to shine to us on the land of our forefathers, would become stronger and stronger till they would become a great light, ומדינת ישראל תיבנה ותיבסס על יסודי התורה והמסורה, רוח ישראל סבא, וכל ליבודייך ליבודי השם. So he says, and we hope that in the future the light would shine and everyone would be חוזר בתשובה and the land would be established on the foundation of Torah, which obviously is a beautiful hope and chazon, right, and expectation. But what about speaking that everyone that is not observant right now, it's asur to assist him? Something happened. From 1920, something major happened. In 1960, by the way, for some reason, it's very difficult. He was not researched so much, Rav Kasher. When you compare, although his chibur is this Torah Shelema, you can find it in every library, in every yeshiva. So he's well known. But about Rav Teichtel, a lot was written, academic research. But about Rav Kasher, almost nothing. Just this year, they printed some book of a memory for Rav Kasher, which is very difficult to get hold of. So I saw that there is a book. I was not able to hold my hands on the sefer, unfortunately. So I would apologize. I was only able to be assisted from the sources of knowledge that you know from the internet or introductions that he himself wrote to his own sefarim. However, so it's difficult for me right now to completely trace this difference in mind. However, in 1968, he wrote another huge sefer. Everything that he wrote was always huge because everything gone inside. As I said, he was mad on printing and writing everything and having everything and anthologies and encyclopedias. That it was this type of a person. So in 1968, a year after Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim, more less than a year, he published a sefer, 2 volumes, about 600 pages, called Hatkufa Agdola, the Great Period or the Great Age. And there he claims, as you saw already in 1950, he said, that we are in the course of redemption, of Geula. And of course, after the 6 Days War, he says, we are not only in the beginning, we are in the midst of redemption. Now, we can say now that it's a little more complicated than maybe what some people thought in 1968. However, in this book, Hatkufa Agdola, he writes the following, and this would give us an answer to this change in his mind. יש השואלים, source ו', איך אפשר שהשם יתברך עשה לנו ניסים על ידי צבא הגנה לישראל, בזמן שהעומדים בראש הם אנשים שאינם שומרים דת ישראל? This is how can it be that with such miracles when the people that stand in the head on the helm are non-observant? I would add, I myself wrote, he says, right, in 1920, that it's not allowed even to assist them because they are not part of the Jewish nation. They are Jews as individuals, but they could not be seen as representative of the Jewish nation. והרי ברגיל, we are used, נעשו ניסים על ידי צדיקים בלבד, only צדיקים perform miracles. התשובה היא, בזמן שעם ישראל בסכנה, כגון בשעת מלחמה, השם יתברך עושה להם ניסים אפילו על ידי אנשים פה כאלו. He says, in time of danger to the whole nation, then all these differentiations between observant and non-observant, everything falls. When in time of external danger, we are all one. It doesn't matter if you are observant or the God would make miracles to the Jewish people as they are. גדול העונש למי שמלמד חובה על עם ישראל ואינו מאמין שהשם יתברך עושה ניסים גם לדור של רשעים. He says it's a great evil to not to see bad in Am Israel and to say that God does not perform miracles if people do not observe the Torah. So it's evilness to claim what he himself claimed in 1920. But I think what we can see what is the difference. The war, being the Holocaust, and the independence war have taught him, I think, or have caused him to reconsider his positions, to understand that you cannot say that people that are not observant are not part of the Jewish people. They are part. You see that they are part. They were being murdered by the Nazis, and they defend and stand for the Jewish people in Israel, in the Jewish state. How can you say that they are not part? Of course God would perform miracles for them as well. ועם אחאב שהיה עובד עבודה זרה ודורו עובד עבודה זרה היו. So for Achab that was idol worshipper and his generation were idol worshippers. So God performed miracles for them. על אחת כמה וכמה בדורנו. So it is for our generation that Baruch Hashem we do have some people that observe and so of course we are God would perform miracles even for people that are and by people that are not observant. So again we see a rabbi that was able to change his mind and again he was shunned by others. And he knew that he would be, of course, he knew what would happen. But it didn't prevent him from saying out aloud, 600 pages, what he believed in. Rav Kasher has received the Israel Prize for his work on the Torah Shlema. As I said, it's a masterpiece. It's extremely unfortunate. No one was able to complete it after his death. So Chumash Dvarim is bereft of an edition of the Torah Shlema. But for 4 Chumashim we have it. Twice he got the Rav Kook Prize for Torah writings. He wrote a book after they landed the man on the moon. He wrote a book about halacha on the moon. When he received an honorary doctorate from Yeshiva University. He was the one to establish the first Eruv in Manhattan. Now, you can imagine that there was also controversy around the Eruv in Manhattan. But this is a man that is not afraid to say what he thinks is correct. He was involved in the questions of Kav HaTarikh, the dateline. Yeah. And he was niftar in 1938. His children served in the army. 1983. Yeah. 1983. His children served in the army. One of his grandchildren, it's interesting, is Professor Asa Kasher. Maybe some of you know. He is an ethics professor, philosophy professor, and he wrote the ethical code to Tzahal, to the IDF. So things are, wheels have this way of turning around. So this is Rav Menachem Kasher. And, when I searched, I couldn't find a good study on him. And I think this is a lacuna that is still missing. If one of you wants to write a doctorate about something, I think that he is a real good subject. However, when I was looking for him, I fell into internet sites that are, basically, they are slandering his name. And they say, no, the reason why he changed his opinion was because he needed money. He always wanted to publish and to print, and he needed money from the Zionists, and that's why he wrote. Now, of course, it's ridiculous. Of course, it's ridiculous. No one writes 600 pages just because. So we believed in that for sure. But you see, it's so interesting that he paid a very high price for what he believed in. So this is the second rabbi, but again, he was able to change his opinion, saw the reality, saw what is going on, and he changed what he thought. The third one, which we'd only touch upon, because as I said, Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope to dedicate to him at least one year, but I guess it will be 2 or 3, is Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. Rav Yosef Dov Alevi Soloveitchik was too young to be a public leader before the Holocaust. However, he grew up. He was a descendant of a family of great Jewish leaders. The Soloveitchik family, already for 3 generations when he was born, were great Lithuanian rabbis. And his father, but more his grandfather, was extreme anti-Zionist. His grandfather was Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. Again, I think about him we had a shiur once. Very well-known rabbi, very, very well-known rabbi, a great Gadol Batorah, and an extreme anti-Zionist. Also, his well-known uncle, the Brisker Rav, the Griz, Reb Velvale, also different names, that made Aliyah to Yerushalayim and died in the 50s, also an extreme anti-Zionist. And he made Aliyah after the Holocaust. Yeah, he came to here, he was in the Turei Karta in Yerushalayim, he lived with them, so he made Aliyah, not meaning that, I don't think that he carried an Israeli idea, I would guess that not. So again, extreme anti-Zionist. And he was born in that environment, and he was raised in this environment. Now, he was an outlier, is that the name? In many aspects, he landed in the University of Berlin. So you can imagine that he was different. Again, I cannot speak right now about his personality as a whole. This is extremely rich subject, which would require at least 1, if not 2 shiurim, but hopefully, Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope to give them during this year. However, I only want to speak about the aspect of him changing alliances, basically. When he came to the United States in 1932, and he became a member in the Aguda Rabbinical Council, the Aguda. But in 1940, in 1935, he tried to became a candidate to the Rabbanut of Tel Aviv, and he lost to Rav Amiel, because Rav Amiel was affiliated with the Mizrahi, and Rav Soloveitchik was affiliated with Aguda. And back then, the choice of Rabbanim in Eretz Israel was in the hands of the Mizrahi, so they rejected his position and instead his candidacy, and instead they picked Rav Amiel. So Rav Soloveitchik returned to America. You can only imagine how history would have gone if he would have become I don't know even to say. God is running history as it should run. So he finished up in America. I think he never revisited Eretz Israel. So after the Second World War, after the Holocaust, and after the establishment of Medinat Israel, he sent back the card to Agudat Israel, and instead he was appointed as the chief, as the Nasi, the president of the Mizrahi in the United States. So that's a change in positions. And he himself writes, and he said that in one of his drashot that he gave. That's a drasha from 1962. It was given in Yiddish, and you can find it either in Yiddish or this is an Hebrew translation. There is also an English translation. And that was a drasha about Yosef. He spoke how Yosef was shunned by his brothers because he had these new ideas. And he said, we must prepare ourselves to the future. So they threw him, and he came to Egypt, and it looked like he became assimilated into the Egyptian culture. But what he really was doing, he was preparing the ground. And when famine hit, then his brothers had a place to run to, and he saved them. So in the end, he saved Torah world. And he says that's the Mizrahi that were shunned by the Haredim. But they came and they established Eretz Israel. And when the Holocaust hit and World War II hit, the yeshivot could only run to Eretz Israel. So in the word of Torah, those that were able to escape. The word of Torah, when it was re-established, who was able to re-establish it? The Mizrahi guys. Also in America, by the way. Because many of the Haredi also opposed immigration to the States, because that was a treifa medina, then they had no infrastructure. All donations, all money to the building of the first Haredi yeshivot in the States didn't come from Haredi businessmen. There was no such a creature in the 50s in America. It was all came from money, either from the Reform, by the way, many also donated from the Reform and conservatives, but also from Mizrahi.
In that train of thought, you have to be careful how far you go, because like the Reform can say that's similar kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. But the Reform didn't come to Eretz Israel. They also thought it's asur to come to Eretz Israel. So Rav Soloveitchik says, it's very interesting, and I will finish with that. He says, in matters of halacha, we go by majority. If majority of the rabbis say X, then that's halacha. But in cases of historical judgment, only God can decide. Only looking back in hindsight, you see who was correct and who was wrong. And even if it was the minority view in the time, history can prove that the minority was right. And Rav Soloveitchik says, I was a Gouda before World War II. And I saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu paskening as the Mizrahi. Because I saw what happened in Europe. And I saw that the only thing that saved the Torah world was the Mizrahi. So I changed my opinion. I changed my view. Because I was open, again, I wouldn't say it that way, I would say he was open to what is happening around him. Okay, so these were three great people, very great people, great rabbis, that were able to change their minds when they saw what is going on around them. It was either the horrors of the Holocaust or the miracles of the establishment of Medinat Israel or the ability to save the word of Torah, each one with what was mostly affecting him. But all of these, I think for us, again, in our small circles or in even wider circles, they can teach us and instruct us the importance of being open-minded and re-evaluating, reconsidering even deeply held beliefs and faiths, and not always just translating and interpreting every occurrence as a proof that, of course, we were right. Not always we are right. I think that's a good lesson to take to the days of Teshuva. So thank you for joining our shiur. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, which would be the last shiur of Elul, we would speak, I hope to speak about the last Chazara b'Teshuva. I think the most massive Chazara b'Teshuva that we saw in the last even 20 years, 30 years, and that is the return of the Ethiopian Jews into Am Yisrael, which is, I think, a very interesting story, and we have a lot to think about and to learn from. So that is Be'ezrat Hashem, a subject to tackle next week. Thank you very much. Have a good week, and Shana Tova u'Metuka, Ktiva v'Chatima Tova.
By the way, this guy who brought Ethiopian Jews, he's an hour shul, Danny Ganon.